shifting gears a little bit, we do have Ryan May here. He has spoken a little bit before, but I'd like him to just reintroduce himself so we could get into the interview portion of this podcast.
Well, hi again. I'm Ryan. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm 25. I went to my master's. I've been with MHI since I was a graduating high school student back in 2015, and I'm now a first year med student at Mayo Clinic School of Medicine.
That's awesome. I'm glad you've achieved so much then. I wanted to backtrack before we really dive into this interview and we get to see like who you as a person. Like, have you ever thought yourself to be in this position like growing up? Like, how where did your interest in like medicine come from, and like where do your interests lie? Like, how was your childhood? How would you describe that, and how did it get you here today? Basically, like, give us a little bit more background as to who you are.
Man,
I'm aware.
no, it's okay. I'll say so. Like I think I started like if you asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up when I was maybe 5, I would have told you like a motorcycle rider because I didn't understand how like salaries worked, and so I just saw myself like, on a bike going down like a 2-lane highway into like eternity. I know I started saying I wanted to be a doctor when I was about 7. I didn't have any clue what it meant in terms of like the real scope of like responsibilities and like all the things that it genuinely means. And so, Dr. May had been a figure in my life for a really long time. So I would like, just do some things with MHI in kind of a cursory capacity, in like some of my adolescence and my teenage years. When I was in high school, I got to participate in a program through our HOSA chapter that let me go on these like 2-week shadowing rotations through like different departments in the hospital. Had some really profound emotional experiences there. And so that's kind of when I got a better feel for what medicine really looked like and felt like, emotional level. And I honestly, it was like in that chapter, I kind of fell in love with it and developed like a deep aversion to it at the same time. I was kind of like, wow, this is like really intense.
Yeah.
And so I'd say like my early college years, like my freshman and sophomore year, I was a pre-med. I was a biochem major with like a general business minor. And so I had the intent to go to med school, but I was still kind of struggling. Like, do I know that I really want to do that with my life? Do I really want to convict myself to like such a long training path? So on and so forth. And so like I did a little bit of professional exploration. Like I looked at maybe like trying to switch to like computational science, which was our version of like our pre-med curriculum and our computer science major that would have gave a little bit of professional flexibility. I decided not to do that. But yeah, just continuing to check experiences. Working in different settings. I worked in like some hospice care. I worked in the ER, shout out like an orthopedic surgeon, and just kind of I gave myself like the business background in case, for whatever reason, like if med school just didn't work out for me, or if there was something else I fell in love with that I had that dexterity. But ultimately, as I continued to kind of grow up, come into myself and experience like a little bit more of life and what was available to me, there just really was, else that I felt like drew me in. And even now in medical school, it's crazy how often I feel that sensation that I really still don't know how to identify. Like when I was like when I was in our cadaver lab, like doing some different things with like one of the plastic surgery residents, and like there's this insane feeling that like physiologically, like I've only ever felt it in moments of like abject terror on a roller coaster. You know what I mean? But like it's coupled with this like like my attention is fixated. I can't avert my eyes.
Yeah.
And so that and it's not something I've remotely encountered in any other space in my entire life. And I'd say that that's probably what's continued to propel me down this path. And I think that that's probably going to be largely attached to what informs, my steps going forward as well.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that completely makes sense. Like you're driven by like that, what sounds like adrenaline and like the hyper focus of like, this is, I guess, what you do now, right? But of course, it makes sense that you also explored other things, because who's supposed to know what they want to do with the rest of their lives without actually exploring what to do with their lives? Like, I've said this in the past, but I've highly considered just getting multiple jobs just to learn new skills. Just that alone interests me. But that's really amazing that you have that background. So I'm assuming there's like, was there any gap between your pre-med and like that background in your bachelor's?
A little bit. So I got my bachelor's. I wasn't I was a little bit burnt out after undergrad, so I knew I didn't want to apply to go straight through. Like I wanted to take one gap year. Um, so I was working at the hospital that's like attached to my school as like a medical scribe, and so I could get some tuition assistance for the MBA program. I always wanted to do MD MBA because actually when I was working at MHI, like coming out of high school, like one of the biggest things I noticed was just how much healthcare finance and just basic economics seemed to like influence health outcomes as much as anything else that I'd ever observed. And so for me, I kind of had this vague idea in my head of kind of wanting to be in a professional that had a lot of dexterity and could have high level impact in both spaces, if that makes sense. And so I decided to go ahead and get the MBA in my application year, because the application is a year long. It's over a year long from the time that the cycle opens to the time that you enter school.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I got my MBA with a concentration in healthcare, health systems administration. And I actually, so that cycle, I was still a bit overwhelmed. I didn't know a whole lot about the application cycle. I got one interview and one waitlist offer. And then I met a new mentor who kind of looked at my stuff and like looked at how I had executed the process. And we felt like if I tried it again, I could get a much better outcome and like try to find an institution that I felt like I could really maximize my potential and really like explore the full breadth of my aspirations a bit more. So I actually decided to reapply and took another year, which I did MHI in a bit more of an intensive capacity. And I worked as a personal trainer for a couple of months and just applied to medical school. So I took a couple of years. One was voluntary, one was somewhat less so, but yeah, there were a couple of years, which is actually really normal. I think a lot of people have the expectation that they're going to come straight from undergrad, but the average age of matriculation I think it's just under 25 years old. So most people are taking some time, living some life, doing some work between undergrad and medical school.
Honestly, I'd hope so, because I think like having that real world experience and having this different level of connection with people definitely aids how people manage themselves within the healthcare system for sure. In particular profession. I wanted to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned that you dealt with burnout, and I feel like that's not typically talked about. Like people are like, yeah, take care of your mental health now. Like it's a trend. Let's be real, it's being a trend now of like, hey, take care of your health, like journal, do this, do that. But people don't talk about the longevity of burnout and how long that really lasts and like what it takes to cope with that. So if that's too difficult, like too personal, you don't have to answer, of course.
Oh no, I trust and believe we can. I want to be as candid and honest as possible because I feel like that's something that we're actually of service to each other. So yeah, so I played football in college on top of the pre-med curriculum, and I had like some other extracurricular activities as well. And so, yeah, I mean, it was really just fatigue. It was interesting because a lot of the things that I did, I felt like filled me up, like emotionally and spiritually. Like I absolutely loved football. I loved most of biochem. There were some things that were definitely tough, but so it was weird for me because there were a lot of things that I was interested in, and there were a lot of things that I felt like fed me. Like they made my life more vibrant. They also like were, physically taxing. I didn't necessarily always get a lot of sleep, and I didn't really know what it meant to me to take care of myself because it was never really something that I was tasked with in that way prior to in my life. Like I never had that much agency in deciding this. Like I went to school for 8 hours because that's what's like federally mandated is that when you're a kid, you go to school for 8 hours. And then my mom made dinner every night, and so like it was, and so I don't even know if that's really a lesson that I learned in undergrad particularly well. Well, I think I learned it in a sense, right? Like I learned how to manage my time. I learned how important it was for me to rest. I learned how important my social connections were, so on and so forth. Full disclosure. So I started medical school as a member of the class of 2025. I did my first couple of blocks and then I had some losses in my family and I felt like, I guess long story short, honestly, I felt like both my education and my grief deserved all of me. Like they needed me to be present in them and I couldn't do both at the same time. So I took the remainder of the year off and I'm actually just not going back this week. So
it's amazing. I'm very proud of you. I don't know you, but I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. But I think, and if there's anything that it means the world to me to evangelize, like I feel like now I've got the balance thing down. Like I've learned balance at a really high level. And I think that's because I learned largely from my classmates is that balance is something that is deeply personal and very dynamic. And I think we think of it often as this kind of like fixed point in space that there's this kind of universal answer to like maintaining or staying perched atop. And it's not like that at all. Like your capacity 1 week to the next is going to be very different, and it's going to require different answers or different activities. And I think that, your line at which you're happy and you're balanced and you're, fresh is going to look different than somebody else's in terms of your productivity to leisure, so on and so forth. And I think it's important to be respectful of that, so like, it's good to like admire, because I have some classmates that like their balance is like 90% work and their 10% play is like forced upon them by the organization. You know what I'm saying? But that's where they're happy. Good. You know what I mean? And so, right? And so I think that what it means to be balanced is ultimately to cultivate like a kind of diverse array, to embrace that kind of just that dynamic nature of human being, and have a little bit of dexterity, right? To say like, okay, like, and be sensitive to what your needs are in the moment, and then have some strategies to be responsive to that.
Yeah, because like as people, we grow every single day, and some people forget that, because they look at other people and they're like, man, this is your job. Why are you not on top of this right now? And it's like, because I'm different than I was yesterday, and my 100% today is different than it was yesterday, and that is the reality of the situation. We all have those like limits, and of course we have goals for ourselves. And I personally relate to you in regards to I do that now to a degree, but not really.
Yeah.
And like I've witnessed my brother do it in college. And you're not just a student, you are an athlete, and that is two separate jobs.
Yeah.
And to maintain that in regards to everything else is so difficult. And like you don't recognize again how much you put into it until you're out of it, because you do feel that fatigue and that burnout towards the end. Those things do fulfill you, but they also take a lot from you, because you have to separate that time. When I tell you, this past semester, I didn't know what 24 hours looked like till I had to use them all. And I so many times, but that is a reality. And burnout is very real. And I assume like that's very common within pre-med as well, right? Because you guys study a lot, and that background that you guys have is like really intense. Someone who's not really from the outside. But I'm glad you were able to share that with us, and I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm glad you grew within that as well. Moving forward, what do you look towards doing with your profession? Like, what impact do you want to make? Like, obviously you have this rich background within medicine, right? Or your understanding of medicine, you've witnessed other people's professions, which I'm sure was like, gave you a sense of humility as a person. It was like, dang, like right now I'm not holding the life of somebody else, but that person is, and that's insane. But like, what do you want to do,
Yeah, so coming in, I'm roughly interested in like either trauma surgery or orthopedic surgery. Long term, I'd like to transition into, I used to say like more so like high level administration, but now I think more so maybe like policy advocacy or like some type of lobbying, maybe like a career in politics at some level. But it's interesting, because I think that what I'm grounded in now is genuine humility. And I think that genuine humility is also firmly attached to a strong understanding of your competencies. I think what I was before was a little bit genuinely like unsure of myself. You know what I'm saying? Or unsure. Right. Because I'm in a place that just has such a insane array of like opportunities and mentorship and support. It's almost like my aspirations have become a little bit more vague, because my perception of or what I might potentially be able to do is so much larger. And so I'm taking a big step back right now and saying like, what is really calling me now, and trying to explore things and like specialties I've never seen. There's so like, I'm from the Southeast. I went to college about an hour and a half south of my hometown. And so, moving across the internet as people from like different states, different parts of the world, like there's just so much rich work that can be taken up, and so I know what my background is, and I know what's always interested me, and so that's kind of I'm gonna use to orient, explore, like meandering that got me here, and so I'm just gonna keep doing what got me here.
What? I appreciate that and respect that. You gotta do what's not broken doesn't need to be fixed. And I'm sure you're going to grow within that too. Obviously, you're going to be different than who you were 5 years ago. And that's something so exciting to look forward to. I know that can be very overwhelming. But truthfully, like if you, like you mentioned, you know your capacity, you've been through what you've been through. With that being said, what's something that you anticipate will be something of a challenge for you within this field? Because I know when people try pre-med or they're on that pre-med track, there's like the obvious difficulties, right, in regards to managing your time and the curriculum itself. But like aside from that, what do you think is something that is going to be a challenge for you that you're either looking forward to dealing with or like kind of a little bit hesitant? It's a deep question, so you can take your time on that. If anybody else has questions as well, please put them in the chat. I'm more than welcome to vocalize them, or you guys could speak up for yourself too, because we are at the last stretch of this interview.
I think the thing this is just the most kind of readily on my mind is that, you go from, to go from like having my entire undergrad experience and all those other things behind me, 2 medical school application cycles behind me. It's like, I come from feeling like I just have like so much experience and so much knowledge, and I feel so comfortable in this space. And now I'm like back at square one. And in terms of just deciding like who I am at this stage of my life, what now aligns with that professionally. And then how do I get there? It's like, it's just like so much more uncertainty. And I think that this is something that's fairly common among pre-meds. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like to deal in uncertainty. Like we like when things are like fairly structured, we know what to expect. Because, your academic path prior to this point is all, I achieve a certain mark. The next step is pretty much pre-programmed for me. And so right now, I think my biggest challenge is literally just to embrace the uncertainty that comes like with this path, to not like, I want to plan for the future. I want to be strategic. I want to, be efficient with my time, pursue the right opportunities, but I don't want to box myself in by like thinking too far ahead. Like I want to make sure that I'm present in every moment and at every stage, and that I engage that under its own terms, because this is your education, this is your professional training, but it's also like a very intense and meaningful chapter of your life, and I don't want to miss that. And that's not something that I'm very good at, because that anxiety kind of drives you to sort of want to, you're like, what do I do now?
I understand.
I was just with my classmates. We were volunteering at the local food bank, and like we were leaving, and like our dean was like, okay, cool. And like, so nobody sent me any emails after my research until Monday, because he's trying to get everybody to just chill out and like worry about adjusting to med school, meet your classmates, enjoy this new space you just moved to. Because, we're all trying to ramp and like, figure out what we're supposed to be doing.
How you're preaching to the choir, you have no idea. It's because my major is vastly different than yours, but even then, like I personally struggle with anxiety as well. So it's something like I like structure. I like knowing where I'm gonna be.
Yeah.
And right now, I'm trying to accept the same thing as well, because I think that's so important to your planning, right? It's like, it's nice to have a plan, but understand like life is more fluid than you think it is, and things happen and you have to adjust. And that's the reality of that. And it's interesting to hear that perspective. And, for those whoever is listening, to know that you're not alone. Like uncertainty is like something that's so common now. I feel like there's a stigma, or not stigma, but story that was told in the past was like, you get your degree, you get a job, you start a family, you do this, you do this, that. And it's like, it's a very like structured thing. But now that it's like, you can do whatever you want, and we're telling you can do whatever you want. So like, it's not our fault that we're not telling you what to do anymore, kind of thing. It's just interesting to hear your perspective, because finding that time and like really building that skill, because it is a skill to like accept things within the moment, is very difficult. And it's something that needs to be like put in the spotlight a little bit more, because I feel like when people say that they're in the moment, what they really mean is like, oh, I took a picture of this and I'm gonna share it later. But it's not like, hey, like I don't need this picture because I'm gonna remember this as long as I need to, and that's that. It's like being there and actually being present is super important. So it's 4:40 or 55 Eastern time. So we have like about roughly 5 to 10 minutes left. So if anybody else has questions for Ryan, this would be the time to say that. Or Dr. Mary, if you have any words, this would be also the time, and it would all be very appreciated.
I just would like to say I'm just so very proud and so happy to hear this interaction. And I remember when Ryan was a high school student speaking to other students who were in college and medical school. And we talked about one day this would be him, and now it's that one day. And one day it's going to be you guys. Absolutely. So it's all steps in a chain, and think about that and know that everything you do now, please remember that you're also doing it for those who come behind you. And you're also giving thanks to those who preceded you. Ryan's going to be joining me at the NMA in Atlanta next month. And we're excited about that, for him to meet some of the incredible leaders that he met earlier, and proudly be able to tell them that he's at Mayo now. And the network and the mentoring goes forward. And we're really pleased because we've been able to see an increase by 20% of young Black men getting into medical school again, because the numbers otherwise have been abysmal. Only it's the same as what's happening in 1970. We're not seeing the increase that we need in the pipeline. So each one is precious to us, and we're grateful. And also the fact that your minds are reaching and thinking about things like economics and breakthroughs and social determinants of health, because that is all of what makes up healthcare, not just knowing the diagnosis and the medicine. It's so much more complicated. So I thank Ryan for the gift of his time and his leadership, and I'm just so proud. And it's just wonderful to see who he's growing into, and also his honesty and his humbleness, because you all need to recognize this. Nobody's perfect. We all have hard moments and hard phases. We have all had to overcome stuff and stumble and pick ourselves back up again. But we're grateful for those who've been with us to help us to do that on the journey. So just take this all to heart, and let's not forget that we stand on the shoulder of those who went before us, for whom it was way harder. And whatever we're dealing with, it was way harder. So it's getting better, and we're getting better, and hope springs eternal, and there's always tomorrow.
Amen.
Olympia, I saw that you unmuted yourself. Would you like?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just wanted to say hi, Ryan. It's nice to see you again. For those that don't know, Ryan and I worked together briefly at MHI, like during the same period of time. So it's really nice to see you again, and I'm glad that you're doing well and back in med school. That's really cool. And I'm very excited for you. I think your story really inspires me, because I think we're similar, but going down very different paths. Because I'm essentially doing the same thing, but with law school, coming from a very untraditional background of now having a computer science degree. It's kind of weird. And it was weird to take the LSAT. Like, New College didn't really know how to handle me saying that I wanted to take the LSAT on campus. They were like, well, you're going to have to create your own proctored space, because we can't do that for you. So now I'm kind of having to navigate this whole system of like applying to law schools by myself, because they didn't really have anybody to advise me, to help me. So I guess my question for you, just more broadly, would be like, what would you say to somebody who's considering going to grad school, or who is nervous about their ability to function in grad school? Because I think we kind of get the impression that it's like a very high pressure environment. And I know I personally, that makes me very nervous. Because I know that law school can be very cutthroat. So it makes me, a little nervous. So do you have any advice that you would give to somebody who feels kind of, self-conscious about that?
Yeah, I feel like, I know, at least like when applying to medical school, like it was really important to me to avoid spaces that were like that. Like the pre-meds at my undergrad were really like that, and I hated it. And so I knew that I didn't want it in med school. So like, honestly, the thing that made Mayo my number one was literally that, like, it was emphasized as like a super collaborative. It made an effort.
Yeah.
So I know that for me, like my community here has been like extremely important. I think that, even in a place that may not have that same type of energy abroad, like you will find your people. And that's kind of like one of the singular most important things that you can do in that space. Because I don't think that, any of us are big enough to to necessarily brave these types of paths alone. And I think that's probably my big, to like mess with the best, like cherish that, like nurture that relationship, because as much as anything else, like that's what's going to be what gets you through. Because most of us will have the like the actual academic tools to do it, like we're able to do it. It might not always be comfortable, you know what I'm saying? There's definitely going to be struggles for most of us. Like there's Like there was one block that I felt really comfortable in, the next block I didn't feel remotely comfortable. You know, even our like Gunner, like the top girl in our class, like she got to, I don't remember what exact block it was, but she struggled deeply. And like that like frustrated with her, and it kind of messed with her identity a little bit. And like we were all there to say like, hey, you know, one, we're still in awe of you, and like two, you know, you're fine. You know what I'm saying? Like she passed, she's on to the next phase, and like everything is okay. But I guess that would be my biggest piece of advice would be like, if the space isn't necessarily conducive to that type of support, try to find your people, whether they're within the institution or not. Like your connections back home will mean the world. Your connections, whatever you have in your environment, will mean the world. But and just have that faith in yourself that like, you know, it's okay to struggle. You know, it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to not be perfect all the time. We're not machines. You know, we were just speaking about how much our capacity varies from day to day. But that'd be my biggest piece of advice, and give that too. Like I think that I found that when I was the most kind of distraught almost, or like when I was kind of at my worst, like the thing that sustained me the most was honestly like giving that type of support to somebody else, you know, to foster those connections in that way.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it's kind of an unfortunate truth of a lot of academic spaces. Not a lot of them are extremely supportive. And so ultimately, I guess I say all that to say that I hope that you find your fit for sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I agree. I feel like there are a lot of people who really need to hear that. I know there's a lot of people at New College, especially who consider going to grad school, but they're worried it's not going to be like New College, which makes sense.
Right.
Because New College is a very different learning environment than, you know, like a traditional university, undergraduate university. So, yeah, thank you. I think your story also really just gives confidence to a lot of people. Like I know I personally am taking a gap year, and it makes me kind of self-conscious sometimes because I'm like, damn, I'm about to be 24. I'm so like behind in life. And then I remember like, oh wait, no, I'm not. I'm like working. I have a job. I'm actually not. I'm just waiting for the cycle.
Yeah,
it's you know.
Another thing I'm gonna quote. There's a third year here. His name's Chris. He's like one of the coolest people I've ever met in my life. But he says like the heart of grad school isn't like grad school. It's the life that happens while you're in grad school. You know, like life doesn't decide, oh, you're a grad student, so now I'm gonna prevent difficult circumstances from coming at you. Oftentimes it feels like sometimes it waits until you're a grad student to decide, hey, it's time to run amok.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and then to your other point for sure. Like I was talking to one of my classmates. Who's 27. He's an incoming student, 27. And he was talking about how, you know, he felt like he was a little bit late. And I'm like, man, like, I don't know. Like, I'm 25. And when I think about my life's rhythm, like the fact that I'm starting med school in this moment, like there was no better moment prior to this for me to start this journey.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like how equipped, like my equipment as a person, my relationships, you know what I'm saying? Like those types of things, the life experience I was able to have, you know, memories with like arguing with my dad in the house because, you know, I ate the last of spaghetti, whatever. Like that's during my gap year, right? Like if I would never have gone back to like stay with him for those months otherwise. And so, I don't know. I feel like everything happens on its natural timing, and I'm grateful that I'm here right now as a 25-year-old as opposed to the kid I was at 22. I think that everything is that much better because of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you.
That was amazing.
Of course.
Mo mentioned something in the chat, and Mo was like, life isn't a race. And I think people need to remember that. It's not even a race. You're not even competing with anybody else but yourself, actually. And where you want to be, whenever you want to be that, right? And it's like, I think especially now in a time of social media, we all like compare ourselves to everybody else's lives, and it's important to recognize, like, again, to be present in your own life, like, you know, building that skill of minding your own business and being happy about your own business, if that makes any sense. And like, I don't know, it's good to hear those words of encouragement. I also appreciate it because it's nice to be reminded that, hey, you know, comparing yourself is not what you want to be doing right now. Like that's not going to help you get anywhere. In fact, it's the only thing that's going to keep you stagnant, because you're going to be like, well, I'm not good enough for that, so what's the point? Like that could be a thought, and it's like, what's the point of saying you're not good enough? Just do it. If you're gonna fail, you're gonna learn something. If you're gonna do it, you're gonna learn something. So it's like you have to like take the leap, I guess.
like I like especially like there's so many incredible people. Like my claim to fame as a like when I was applying was that I was a D1 running back and receiver and a pre-med, right? And that's kind of like a fairly rare combination. One of my classmates played tight end 3 years. Harvard for undergrad. Like it's weird because we're also talented, also work hard, also do special things. So there comes a point where it's impossible to like silo yourself off from other people's the things that make them special or the things that were unique about their path through life or opportunity or whatever else. And so I think that there's a balancing act between having a healthy relationship with how like we shouldn't be assessing our value in comparison to others by any means. But I think it's a wonderful thing to like admire the competencies that others display or to draw inspiration from them. And I think that's always my goal. It's not something that I embody perfectly by any means. I'm frequently intimidated when one of these super geniuses walking around me is like doing whatever they're doing. You know, like it happens. We're human, right? The place I want to get to, you know, where I hope that like maybe by the end of medical school, that's the place that I'm grounded in more universally, is where I look around and I see somebody around me that's like special or something like wonderful is happening for them that really doesn't happen for most people that are coming through this path. And that's just like, you know, a wholly wonderful internal experience. Because I feel like I've grown up so much, like I've grown up the most, especially when I was like a high school student or a college student, or especially as an athlete. Like I grew the most from my proximity to the people that scared the crap out of me, by virtue of them being themselves and being excellent. And so, and that's not a place that we're just going to snap our fingers and be all the time. You know, I think that it's important to hold space for those emotions that we have, you know, as we continue to connect with hardworking, talented, highly achieving people. And I hope that all of us, you know, as you know, when we get to a point where like, you know, that's you know, the people around us.
I completely agree. And although I just preached about not competing with people, I'm definitely one of the most competitive people I know. Like I will know, like if I feel some level of intimidation in regards to skill, like all of a sudden my A game is there. Like
it makes me laugh. Like I laugh at myself. I'm like, okay, yeah.
Like it's like, oh yeah, so I could do that all along. Actually, that was just a choice.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's great too, because they're also super humble people. Like Ben, you know, mentioned, like you'd never know if you didn't know who he was in advance, or you know somebody else didn't tell you, right? So like it helps like just that they're like that. But I'm like, if I wasn't around people that didn't have me like a little bit on edge, would I really be in the right place?
Right. You gotta work towards something sometimes, and like having that environment is like crucial. Like, yeah.
And that's I don't know. The counterpiece to that to hold on to though is that you're here too. Like when you get there, like when you're in law school, you're there too. Nobody sneaks into law school. Nobody sneaks into med school. Nobody snuck in any of these programs. You belong. So the same thing that you give to everybody else in that space, like the same credit that you give them just by virtue of being in the space with you, you deserve. And I think that that's the piece that we talk about imposter syndrome, and we talk about the kind of unhealthy manifestation of those feelings. That's the piece. That's one of the pieces I think is missing, is that we're not giving ourselves the same thing that we're giving to everybody else, despite having all the same things that qualify.
Exactly. I completely agree. Well, I believe it's the end of our time. I wish we could continue this discussion for like 2 hours more. I feel like we could talk endlessly, but out of respect for everybody else's time and yours, I'd like to wrap this up. So to whomever's listening, this is the end of our third interview actually for the Journal Club podcast, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. If anybody has any last closing remarks, that would be appreciated as of now. If not, in a few seconds, Olympia will stop recording. So if you have any handles, Ryan, that you would like to promote, or any organizations besides MHI you would like to promote, this also would be the time. But yeah, any last words, Dr. Merritt?
Oh, this was such a great and real and authentic exchange, and it gives me encouragement for our future to know that I have young people like you coming along behind and thinking as deeply and profoundly as you are about the things that you are, and also hopefully bonding. And yes, we should do it again. And I was trying to grab Ryan because I knew he was about to dive in, and hear from him as he continues on kind of